Meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today, our committee is resuming its study on sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces. So for the benefit of the witnesses, when you're ready to speak, you can click on your microphone icon to activate your mic, and comments should be addressed through the chair. Interpretation in this video conference is very much like in regular committee meetings. There is a button at the bottom that you can choose English or French. When you're speaking, please speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. So now I would like to welcome our witnesses, who will each have 5 minutes for their opening remarks. Today we have Ms. Julie Lalonde, and also from It's Just 700, Ms. Christine Wood. And so, Ms. Lalonde, I would ask you to begin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for the invitation today. I am pleased to see that the committee has created time to hear experts from different backgrounds like me. As you've mentioned, my name is Julie S. Lalonde, and I am working to put an end to the violence that women in Canada have been experiencing for nearly 20 years. I train thousands of people every year, and I have worked in 5 countries on 3 continents in 2 languages.
I'm the daughter of a former CAF member. My expertise in system change, violence prevention, and bystander intervention are what dragged me into this conversation. I had a now infamous day of training all officer cadets at the Royal Military College in Kingston in the fall of 2014. The anti-harassment educator got harassed at RMC was the headline across the country. But what was unfortunately missed is that I filed a complaint with RMC for reasons that go beyond the harassment I personally experienced. I was, and remain, deeply troubled by the comments cadets made in regards to sexual violence. Victim blaming was rampant, and the cadets insisted that women who drink too much are asking to be raped, except for one Navy cadet. He showed immense courage, and courage is what I would like to focus on for my comments today. I was invited to train all officer cadets, grouped by year, on a rainy October day in 2014. The first and second years were unruly, but manageable. The third year group was by far the worst audience I have ever dealt with. Yes, they did accuse me of hating all men, laughed at the definition of consent, and took every opportunity they could to shift the blame from perpetrators to victims. During a particularly tense moment, I frankly lost the room. They were furious with my focus on bystanders and began yelling over each other and heckling me. In a sea of largely green uniforms, a man in a Navy uniform shot his hand up. He was sitting amongst the most boisterous group, so to be honest, I called on him with hesitation. But to my surprise, and the surprise of everyone else in the room, he stood up for me. He began to berate his classmates for attacking me, told them they were being babies for being so upset, and went so far as to say, quote, "The way we talk about women at RMC is embarrassing." The room was stunned into silence. I think of this man often. In the days and months that followed my day at RMC, cadets and CAF members took to social media and traditional media to praise the cadets for being brave enough to challenge the educator. Hundreds of men derailing a conversation on sexual violence prevention to call the female facilitator a man-hater is not brave. Being the sole voice in a room of 200 people willing to take a stand in support of progress is bravery of the highest level. That is what we need from you now. You will not eradicate sexual violence, misogyny, and other forms of oppression within the military, such as racism, transphobia, and homophobia, unless you are willing to be brave. Are CAF members uncomfortable with terms like rape culture, toxic masculinity, and survivor-centered? Absolutely, we've seen that. but you cannot change something that you won't even name. I want to end by reminding you that I am calling on you to do something that I am doing myself. I am not asking you to do something that I am not personally willing to do myself. Since I came forward about my experience a few years ago, I have received thousands of threatening emails, social media messages, and even phone calls. I've been accosted at in-person events, and I can no longer speak in public on any topic without a security detail. I have paid dearly for my courage, and so it is very disheartening to see those of you with immense power shying away from the hard work that's necessary to make change. Sexual violence has existed within the Canadian Armed Forces for decades. The blame does not lie with one individual, one leader, or even one political party. Please keep your eyes on the prize and choose bravery when having this conversation. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps ce matin. J'ai hâte à...
Thank you, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
And now we'll go to Ms. Wood for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you. Get my notes here. It is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to represent the group It's Just 700. 5 weeks ago, unexpectedly, the founder of our group, Marie-Claude Gagnon, who most people know as MC, stepped down. She stepped away from It's Just 700. After 6 years of advocacy at the highest levels of government, she's reached a point where the cost of giving insight and voice and access to hundreds of men and women is too great a price to pay alone. So something simple but important to remember as we engage today is that this is hard stuff. This is ugly stuff. Sexual assault isn't talked about lightly. It's an ugly side of human nature. At this point, I really believe that sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces is a national embarrassment. Our collective Canadian conscience has been hit hard by the recent high-profile allegations of inappropriate sexual behavior by our most senior leaders. It is outrageous that 2 chiefs of defense have faced allegations within weeks of each other, but it's even more outrageous to accept that 1,600 people report a sexual assault on average every year within the CAF. This isn't friendly fire. It's not an accident or an honest mistake. It's rape and it's abuse of authority. I can tell you things that you have heard before. Victims need supports. There are more and more coming forward, and there is still no safety net there to catch them. These individuals are not coming forward to report a simple discrepancy they saw in paperwork. They are coming forward with their experiences of terror, debilitating anxiety, and shredded self-confidence. They are broken. It is simply unethical to continue to ask them to come forward without having a plan in place to support them. So to be clear, we are asking for these same supports that we were asking for 4 years ago. And that is a national platform for online peer support, group therapy, outpatient therapy, and inpatient psychiatric care when necessary that is MST specific in its focus. It needs to be trauma informed. It needs to be able to address the moral injury of betrayal by your brothers and sisters in uniform. The nature, duration, and severity of our injuries is something that every affected individual is struggling to explain right now. That's the terminology used in the settlement forms for the class action lawsuit: the nature, the duration, and the severity. So many people are struggling to find the words. It's not easy, and neither are the next steps forward. Up front, I need to say again that we need care. It has to be targeted. Post-traumatic stress disorder is chronic, and it can be deadly. It doesn't matter where the trauma came from. The end result is what it is. Sexual trauma is not necessarily worse or easier than combat trauma. It's just different. I'm sure you're aware of the following: that 1 in 5 victims is a man, that military life is exceptional, but places exceptional roadblocks in accessing care. We frequently are posted, moving on long-term training courses, and often, most often, away from our extended family. It's unfortunate that we are still trying to get an agreed upon definition of what military sexual trauma even is, as now it is an American term. And if we in Canada can develop our understanding, black and white, of what military sexual trauma is, we can have greater research and data and access and provide targeted treatment.
I'm sorry, that's your time. I'm sure we'll capture the rest in the questions. And if I could ask you to raise your mic closer to your nose, we're getting a little bit of popping. And we're going to go in. Oh, that's fine. It was wonderful. And now we're going to go into our first round of questions, and we'll begin with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and sharing your experiences. And Christine, you represent an organization, it's just 700 here, and that helps individuals who have been victims of sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces, and you yourself have also been a victim. My question to you is, how did you go about reporting your assault? Has it generally been the same for other victims as well?
Thank you for the question. I reported my assault, can you hear me now better? Is this okay? Okay. I reported my assault the day after I found out it actually was an assault. My drink was spiked at the officers' mess. And so I didn't think it had happened. Thought I made a mistake somehow, but when the blood work came back, I knew. And I was advised to wait and consider whether it's a good idea to report or not, because reprisals are faced by those who report. It follows them around their career as they get posted. So I waited 24 hours, and I really thought about that, and in the end decided that I had to. It was just too wrong. The reporting process itself was terrifying. It was me in a room with men for about 2 hours, 3 hours. I was videotaped. I felt like a suspect. It was a traumatic process for sure. And I was very unsatisfied. I'll say that up front, very unsatisfied with how the investigation went, how it was conducted, how supported I was, not supported. And so happy to speak to any more of that, but that's generally my experience. And I would say it's maybe 50-50 within the group. It's just 700. Some people report and some people don't, but most people are unsatisfied with the response and the process that happens after.
You spoke about your experience and what others feel like. What, if any, changes would you like to see implemented in the complaint process to ensure, one, that those who are coming forward are both treated appropriately and that the complaint process is given its due diligence?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I've heard a lot of talk about an independent external oversight committee, and I just have to fully support that idea. I believe that if there was an independent place separate from the CAF where individuals can report an assault and it can be investigated, it can be tracked, and a victim can have basically an advocate throughout the whole process, that would help immensely.
You also spoke about how you felt and while you were going through the reporting process. How do other individuals feel during that process? Do people think there's a desire to investigate, or was the culture unwelcoming and cold?
For myself, I believe they took it seriously. I do. They were serious. There was a genuine interest in pursuing this. Unfortunately, I know many, many people who reported within their chain of command, and the complaint was not acted on. So I think it is very important to make sure that this process happens outside of the chain of command. It can't be influenced by the military unit this is happening in.
Recently, it's been reported by the acting chief of the defense staff that Operation Honor has been a failure and was shutting down and would take the good and build something new from it. Do you believe there's anything that was good about Operation Honor, and is there anything worth building from?
The greatest thing about Operation Honor is that it acknowledged that there is a problem, and it brought the conversation out into the public. But it failed to define the issue. And it was done in a way that did not address the deep cultural issues at play here. Sexualized culture is a real thing, and an order is not going to change that. I'm happy to see that the duty to report is being replaced with a duty to respond. That's crucial, and I'm willing to talk about that more if you like.
We're going to go now to Ms. Hutchings for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to you both for being here today, for your bravery, for your perseverance, for your advocacy in getting this resolved and moving forward. And this committee has such an opportunity to really put politics aside and really bring recommendations directly to the government and how to rebuild the trust and how to rebuild long-term change in the current culture at CAF. And the study needs to be about all members of the Canadian Armed Forces and ensure that each and every member is working in a safe and respectful work environment. And the minister has stated that all options are on the table. And based on your expertise and following on the line of the questioning of my colleague, Ms. Lalonde, what are your recommendations to ensure that a real significant change in the military culture happens?
Well, first of all, you have to build off what Christine said, you got to name what the problem is. So, right away, you have to acknowledge that this is a systemic issue. We need to move away from these, one bad apple, it's this CDS. Oh no, it's just CDS, right? Clearly it's a systemic issue. One, there needs to be, so that first piece is just acknowledge that you're talking about sexual violence. I think we should even question language like sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct is not a term that is used outside. It's a bureaucratic term. And in the military context, it conflates someone having a consensual affair with sexual violence, which are two very different things. And so the term sexual misconduct doesn't raise shackles in the same way within the military because it can mean so many different things. And so we need to have a narrow definition. There needs to be long-term funding commitments. Yes, we can have a review every 5 years, like what was supposed to be the case with Operation Honor, for example, but there needs to be long-term funding commitments made to ensure that things like, women, like equipment that women need is not taken from the main budget of that particular group, because then there's resentment built because women are costing more to integrate, for example. Systemic and long-term funding for prevention strategies. Sexual violence can be prevented. This is not a revelation, like that is a fact, right? We can prevent the vast majority of sexual violence, but if we don't have that attitude, we're only going to fund the making sure that survivors get the counseling they need, which is important, but that's not prevention work. And the military needs to listen to outsiders. The military is a notoriously insular environment where the assumption is we are special, we are different, no one really understands us. But the expertise does not sit within CAF. They have shown that they are incapable on their own of solving this problem. And so there needs to be a mechanism to have external input informing every decision that's made. And I would say the last thing that you always need is buy-in from the senior folks. This is a hierarchical organization, and there is clearly no understanding of power dynamics within the military, which is mind-boggling to the average Canadian because you work in a hierarchy.
Okay.
And so there needs to be recognition of that piece.
Thank you so much for that. Ms. Wood, in your remarks, you made reference to 1 in 5 are men. 20% of your membership are men. Can you speak to this and any recommendations you have to ensure that our survivor-focused approach really engages and empowers both men as allies and survivors?
Yes, thank you for that question, because it is an important thing to acknowledge. It's difficult for women to come forward. It is way more difficult for men to come forward. The stigma and the shame is, multiplied by 1,000 for them. There's this, we talk about this masculine warrior ideal, and men who have been raped by their fellow soldiers are deeply embarrassed, and they end up deeply affected by it. So they suffer even more in silence than women. I think there needs to be a very public acknowledgement that this is not just a women's issue. It's a human issue, and it is a systemic issue. Going forward, men need to be a part of the conversation. They need to be sought out and engaged. I can't speak for every one of their needs, but I know that many of them are the same as what we ask for. We need supports, we need care, we need continuity of care.
Quick.
Non, c'est la fin de votre temps.
That's the end of your time. And now over to Madame Larouche, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, Madame Lalonde and Madame Wood, your testimonies is so touching. I would like to congratulate you for your courage and for all of the work that you are doing, because trying to change this culture, you used words such as toxic masculinity. You talked about a culture which is dangerous within the Canadian Armed Forces. So bravo for your courage. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Both of you have talked about trauma that victims experience. I'd like to hear more from you on this. In the 2000s, when I was a student in journalism, I was able to talk to the Canadian Forces Ombudsman because I had seen a newspaper saying that the forces were interested in the psychological health of their soldiers. And so there were various newspaper articles after that. And then since then, we've been talking about this topic, which had been taboo before. So the issue of post-traumatic shock and post-traumatic stress, we talked about soldiers who've been to war. How can we apply this, or perhaps did we underestimate this post-traumatic shock syndrome for victims of sexual assault in the forces? Because both of you said that when you're a victim of sexual assault, it's hard to report it, especially because you're experiencing that shock.
Dean, do you want to answer that? It's Kamasi.
Why don't you start?
Okay, alors,
So first of all, yes, the thing to recognize is that trauma in the Army is not just because you've been to combat. It's not because you've just been to war. In the area that I work in, to end violence against women, when you hear about people talking about trauma, everybody assumes that it's because you've been a soldier. I completely agree that one of the things that the Canadian Army has to do immediately is to recognize the continuum of trauma that occurs in the Canadian Army. It's not a hierarchy in which if you suffered because you were in Afghanistan, that's worse than if you suffered because you were sexually assaulted by a colleague. You have to recognize this, and you have to say it out loud and push to end this hierarchy and have a continuum. And I think that that would change attitudes a lot, and it would change the fact that people would then feel more comfortable reporting. Ms. Wood, would you like to add anything?
How do I say this? There is no hierarchy to trauma. There's no hierarchy to PTSD. Military sexual trauma, if that's the word that we can all accept that we're using today, it is not recognized automatically by everyone as an operational stress injury. And when it is categorized as that, additional supports and programs and therapies can be accessed. But because we've been excluded from that definition, we have suffered as that. There's been consequences. I appreciate the comment about it being courageous for us to be here, but it's not. I argue that it's just a moral imperative that someone is bringing this up, that someone is continuing to try and hold the government accountable for this. And I say this acknowledging that the people I know who have fought the hardest for so many years are burning out, and they are at the edge. I have a dear friend who is right now writing emails to herself to remind her of all the reasons that she should not commit suicide. The burnout and the pain is palpable, and it should not be up to us to keep sending the same message year after year after year. We've engaged in many meaningful consultations. So I appreciate the vote of confidence, but it really is not courage. It just has to be. Thank you.
Évidemment, vous devez le faire. Donc, en conclusion,
Yes, I understand that you must do this. So in conclusion, by first, we have to recognize that the post-traumatic stress syndrome is not an issue of hierarchy or being abroad. You could have post-traumatic stress even if you are a victim of sexual assault in the Canadian Forces. And so if you recognize the syndrome for soldiers abroad, we have to recognize it for victims, male or female, of sexual assault. Yes, absolutely. Across the globe, people who have the levels, the earliest levels of this, the highest levels, are victims of rape, and then second, people who were in the army. But across the globe, the people with the highest rates of PTSD are victims of sexual violence. So it is urgent that we take this seriously. And we don't establish this hierarchy, because by thinking in a hierarchy, then people who report sexual assault don't receive the support they deserve because it's not perceived as being the same thing. That's not okay. Thank you for doing your duty, ladies.
And now we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I find it difficult to start in this and try and collect where we need to go. We've often heard, I know that I've heard from individuals, and this idea that you don't talk about it is so overwhelming. And to try and provide them with the idea that there is that we go forward, we truly this time create that independent external mechanism that isn't that can investigate criminal activity, that isn't linked to that chain of command, that provides what
has stopped victims from coming forward or survivors from coming forward in the past is that need for the protection, the need for the supports around them, and to create that going forward. We've studied this a number of times. Deschamps studied it for sure, of course. This committee studied it in 2019. From testimony from this committee from 2019, Ms. Wood, your predecessor, MC, talked about government-funded programs for those who are injured, having a strong male-dominated focus, in fact, and focusing on those types of injuries. And she noted that there wasn't a GBA plus lens applied to the programs that currently exist. Is that still the case in your expertise from what you've seen?
For the most part, yes, it is still the same. Okay. It's like, I feel like women have never had a level playing field in the forces. We were mandated to be included, and there were never there was never the funding or the supports or the structures, the infrastructure that
and
women needed.
And the resent that still is experienced because of that mandate.
Yeah. So it's part of what contributes to what's, the situation now. In terms of supports, I think, most supports that are generally offered to sexual assault survivors are within these organizations that were designed to treat men and to treat their trauma. For example, the OSI clinic. I've been offered a seat in a group therapy session. They're all men and they're all there with combat trauma. And I don't even know who raped me. So there's no way I'm going into that room. That's a personal example, but it's across the board. And it's still, I think, at that point where we talk about GBA plus, everything, it doesn't start with GBA plus. Everyone kind of checks it as a box at the end of their design. And so I'd like to see something that is from the ground up built, victim-centric, able to address women's needs, but also men, also male survivors. It's important. They are suffering in even more silence than we have been.
And in terms of what your organization has seen, I mean, on Tuesday, the Minister of Defense came before the Defense Committee and said that the government has been working hard to respond to that Deschamps report, putting in measures focused on understanding the issue, preventing harm. And yet, when we heard directly from Madame Deschamps and other organizations, that's not what we're hearing. So from your organization's point of view, I mean, the Deschamps report, ultimately, it laid it out, right? It talked about that independence, that external review process. So has there been the progress in that at all? Or can you provide this committee with specific examples of where it hasn't happened or where it needs to go?
Well, I mean, I think there has been some progress, but I also agree that all the recommendations by Madame Deschamps have not been followed. The SMRC is a skeleton of what she envisioned it would be. So specifically, I would like to see the SMRC's mandate expanded to act as that external oversight, that external place to report. And as I said, I'd like to see a definition, an actual working definition. There are so many of the basics that we're missing at this point. And so from the point of my organization, there's been progress, but not enough.
For both witnesses, that education piece, that's the fundamental start. I mean, Ms. Lalonde, you talked about prevention, and that's where that education starts. I've been told that, yes, there's a seminar that's held maybe once a year. That isn't enough. So where does that education, what would you suggest in terms of, again, this committee, what we bring forward, what we put forward to the government, the structure of what you see in terms of that educational reform?
So we need survivor-directed, survivor-informed bystander intervention mechanisms And I say that because when the Operation Honor happened and the military decided to do something, they did not have bystander training from a survivor-directed perspective. And so what they saw was a massive increase in third-party reporting, but a decrease in people actually wanting to go through with the court-martial process because the bystanders did not report with the victim's permission. And so we need robust bystander intervention training that takes survivors into account. And the second thing that I would say is that all of the research shows that if bystander intervention training is not, there's no booster within 6 to 8 months of the initial training, people lose the confidence to use those skills. They don't lose the skills, but they lose the confidence that bystander training tells them, yeah, it's scary, but do it anyway. And so we need often early bystander training that really looks at it from a fulsome lens.
Good. And now we're going to go to Miss Alislav for 5 minutes in our second round.
Thank you so very much to both of you. I know that you made a comment that it doesn't take courage because it's what needs to be done. And the very fact of saying that shows how great the courage that you have is. Because if people are not willing to do the things that are hard, knowing that it's going to have that personal cost and do it anyway, we can't make any progress. So I sincerely want to thank you. And Ms. Lalonde in particular, I went to military college a long time ago in a place far away, and that is where the majority of Canadian Forces officers are trained. They have a separate culture, they have a separate rule system, they have a separate justice system. And yet it's so powerful that it carries, obviously, and sets the norms, attitudes, and behaviors for the next 30 years. General Vance, as CDS, attended military college, and if we believe what we've heard in the media, there were things that occurred at military college that may have formed his future culture as well. So my question is, what do we need to do in addition to the other recommendations that you've made at RMC or the military colleges to ensure that that comprehensive training, you say a booster even for bystanders, that in that captive 4 years of 24/7 concentrated training of the future officers, what would you recommend, having been there and seen how powerful that environment is?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to reiterate what I said from the start, which was the third years were the worst group, which means those are people who have been there for 3 years. So if the first years are unruly, you could argue that we pulled from a bad pool. Third year means I've been indoctrinated to believe that this is appropriate behavior. So the other thing that's important is when I was there to present, there were I found out later, there were a number of students who had gotten in trouble for crossing campus without their uniform in proper order. So people are being punished for not wearing the proper belt when crossing campus, but they were not punished for yelling and catcalling the anti-harassment officer. So there's an attitudinal shift that needs to happen. And in terms of a simple policy, it unfortunately is a combination of different things, right? There's no silver bullet to solve what happened at RMC that day. But I can tell you that there's certainly an attitudinal shift that needs to change, where RMC students fundamentally believe they are above those who come through the ranks through just taking basic training and joining the reserves, for example. So there is a elitism within RMC that needs to be put in check in a big way. There's a recognition, secondly, that we're talking about sexual violence, which is important, but we're not going to solve sexual violence in the military unless we also talk about it from an intersectional lens. RMC is a very white institution. It is very male dominated, but it's also very white. So again, there are power dynamics at play that are just not being called out. And so my belief is if you can punish people for not wearing their uniform properly, you can absolutely mandate that they take training every 6 months. You can absolutely mandate that it's done effectively. So what we know is a male and a female co-facilitation is the most effective way to reach those audiences. Like, we have the answers, but at the macro level, RMC's problem is they think they're special. They think they're better than everyone else. And so they feel like they're removed from the conversations happening within the broader CAF. And that absolutely needs to be called out and put a stop to.
And 30 years later, they are the primary senior officers of the vice admirals and the admirals and the chief of the defense staff.
Yeah, it's a feeder school essentially, right? And so if you're a third-year student who can say to my face, I didn't listen to you because you're a woman and a civilian, and I know that 18 months later that person is leading troops, I'm concerned, and we should all be concerned. It wasn't just about
30
me.
years later, he could be a 4-star general, and
Absolutely.
that attitude has remained. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So the seriousness of the offense, like you said, not wearing a belt, crossing a parade square, not around the edges, not having your the right books at a lecture. Those are serious offenses. Sexual misconduct, assault, or even just behavior is not viewed the same way. Would you?
I'm sorry, that's your time. We're going to go now to Ms. Hutchings, and Ms. Sidhu will be splitting their time, and we'll start with Ms. Hutchings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And quickly for you, Christine, I know you didn't get to complete all your suggestions in your opening remarks. So in a minute, can you just finish off your opening remarks and then I'll pass it over to my colleague. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. I do. I mean, there are definitely, specific asks. Online platform for peer support. I can explain why it's so important to have it online. Group therapy, outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment. There is a model of inpatient treatment in the United States. USVA has an inpatient program to address soldiers with MST-based trauma. I think, and this bears back to what Julie was just saying, one of the most important things that needs to be re-examined at this point is the ethics and the professionalism that we expect our leaders to have. I think that's part of the core problem. I think we need to revisit what the idea is of, like, what are we taking an oath for? What does it mean? And how do we hold ourselves accountable? Also, how do we hold our leaders accountable of anything? I would like to see a justice system that actually holds senior leaders accountable. A CDS cannot be tried. So the system itself is broken. There are many, as Julie said, many different things that can be done to address it.
Ms. Sidhu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank both of our panelists for coming forward to share their testimonies. We want you to know that the work you do with survivors will help us to end the culture of silence and bring an end to assault in armed forces. Your testimony matters to us. If you feel you are not able to complete your testimony due to time constraint, please submit a written testimony to us. So my first question to Ms. Lalonde, can you discuss why it is crucial for the survivor experience to inform the solution and the path forward?
Absolutely. I'm going to go back to the piece around third-party reporting because I think that's a really good concrete example. So when Operation Honor happened, when there was an emphasis on we have to eradicate this behavior, it was still sort of framed as this, we got to get rid of the couple bad apples. And I feel like that attitude still hasn't changed. But the belief was report everything that you see. But because it was framed from a legal perspective and not, as Christine said, from an ethical perspective, you had bystanders who were just reporting things right away to frankly just cover their own backs should it ever become public. And that's what happens when you don't actually have survivors informing the policy, because a survivor-directed approach would say, what's actually best for the person who's been harmed in this moment? This isn't about checking off a box. This is about making sure that that person is empowered to make a decision. So maybe that person doesn't want to report because they actually just want to confront the perpetrator and just have a conversation with them directly. But you removed their ability to do that. And the last thing I would say is I really think it's important for us to address the fact that we have a woman who's come forward right now because she was outed by someone who leaked her story to the CBC. And whether they leaked it for partisan reasons or they leaked it because they thought they were doing the right thing, that victim was not helped. And I think she's been very generous in saying that her accuser was also deprived of a fair trial because it was leaked to the media. So I think that's a clear example of survivors own their stories and nobody should be able to take it away from them.
Yes. Could I jump in just very quickly and add to that? A good friend of mine through the group that I know was in a remote location when she was assaulted, and she did not want to report at that time because there were no supports around her. Someone reported on her behalf, and it was catastrophic for her career. She's released since. Consent is the very most basic component of all of this. We were denied consent when we were assaulted. We should consent. We should have the ability to consent to what happens after.
Recently, Lieutenant General Eyre announced that in addressing sexual misconduct cases, there will be a change from duty to report to duty to respond. Ms. Wood, can you expand on this distinction and why this has been received as a positive step?
Yes. The distinction is that other members who may have witnessed an assault or inappropriate behavior are no longer compelled to come forward and report it. And a victim can choose to report and start a process when it is suitable for them, for their family, for their career. It is an important step that gives agency and choice back to the individual. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the second part of your question, ma'am.
And how can we include a trauma-informed lens to this study? Which recommendation do you have for us as a committee as we evaluate not only the systemic impacts of this issue, but also the effects it has on individual survivors?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking this new system, if it's developed for independent reporting. I just refer back that it gives victims choices, and it ensures their privacy and their confidence. It's a deeply personal issue, and so it needs to be treated as such.
Very good. And now, Madame LaRouche for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Everything that you're saying is so interesting, and I've taken lots of notes. Both of you have talked about how the people in positions of authority, senior officers, have to show the example. They have to be the examples at all times. And you explained, Ms. Lalonde, if you're training soldiers who don't understand the issues 30 years later when they become the higher-ups in the hierarchy, it's perhaps more difficult. So our senior officers, what do you think? The ones who allow themselves to engage in deviant behavior, should they have exemplary punishments, in other words, that correspond to their functions and duties? Could either of you perhaps answer this? I'll let Christine talk about the part that is the specific part, but from my end, I could say that when you don't emphasize the fact that, well, for example, in the sessions, I had 4 sessions. No major person stayed in the room. So right away, you're not sending a message saying that this is important, we take this seriously. I've taken the time today to be here. So that's already important. Second, yes, we have to train people right from the beginning. But don't forget the people who are in higher up positions. They need training too. They're the ones who are creating the policy. They're the ones who are leading the discussion about violence and sexual violence. So if they're not trained, they're not giving the right information. And second of all, I know that this is a bit controversial and people don't like it, but if you can't change an environment, if you don't change a culture, all you're going to do is raise people who are part of that culture. Because to be able to succeed in the Canadian Army, you have to believe in its culture. Well, this current culture, I mean, you know, it's garbage. It doesn't make any sense. So if we're giving opportunities to people who really believe in that culture, that says a lot. Ms. Wood, in just a few seconds.
You know, just I'm sorry. Yeah, you can hear me. Double down on what Ms. Lalonde said. The leaders need to lead by example. One of the challenges to that is that there are 5 generations of people who are serving in the CAF right now. So upper leadership really feels clueless in some ways. They feel, I specifically was in a meeting 2.5 years ago with General Vance, and he looked me in the eye and said, "This is the first time in my career that I honestly don't know what to do." And I mean, since then, my opinion of everything has changed, but they need to be trained just as much as the folks coming in. It's top down, bottom up.
Very good. And then we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
So yeah, as we continue the conversation about that education, that piece, the fact that it needs to happen at least every 6 months for reinforcement, that it has to be throughout an entire career, continual, not just to be reinforced, but for those at the top to know what they actually have to do and their responsibility. I wanted to talk too about the need for those greater resources to put it into, of course, education, to put it into the supports that the survivors need, the counseling, the programs. We talked a lot about what happens within Canadian Armed Forces. I'd like to shift and see if you have examples that you'd like to recommend for the Veterans Affairs Canada. Obviously, there's a continuation there in terms of programming and what's required. So if you could put in your expertise on that and requirements for that as well.
I could jump in on that. The very first thing that I'd like to say is that there needs to be greater cooperation between CAF and VAC, and especially in that time of transition for a member. Also, in terms of the SMRC and their mandate, one of the expansions I would like to see is that they expand to cover veteran survivors of MSD. I would also say that there needs to be a massive amount of research done into the fallout from sexual trauma in service. So whether it's psychological or physical or spiritual, there's a lot of different aspects to the injury. There's a lot of consequential conditions that are not necessarily recognized by VAC as of yet. And just to give you a quick example, for myself, since being diagnosed with PTSD, I've gotten an autoimmune disease, I've gotten fibromyalgia, I have chronic migraines, and the list goes on from there. It's had a total physical effect on my body. And that's something that I have had to fight to get VAC to recognize and to properly compensate me for. I'll stop there. This is all happening really quick. I'm not used to this kind of quick back and forth, and I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time.
No, you're doing very well. And so I think we've got enough time for one question each. So go Ms. Wong, one question, and then to the Liberals.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And without, spending too much time, I just want to ask the both witnesses to follow up with what my colleague Leona just said, about the culture and the years. And you mentioned about 5 generations. And so just wanted both of you to comment. You have the last words.
Okay. If I were to speak about culture change, the number one thing is leveling the playfield, truly at this point, so that women have the same ground to stand on as men. This means money for women's healthcare. This means money for MST research. And it means providing education programs for healing, for mentoring, for leadership. I think that we need a national day of recognition for women in uniform. I think we need to celebrate and acknowledge the women who have made CAF more accessible for other women. I would like to see an emphasis on women being as good as they can be, not women being as good as men. We are different, and we do bring different skills to the table. A lot of women who are at the top, who have succeeded in this culture, have put their head down and ignored what was happening in order to persevere. And while I admire them, to be honest, they are part of the problem. The silence around this issue, the majority of people are silent, and it takes the actions of a few and the silence of the majority to create this issue where we're at, this point where we're at right now. So there's a lot of things to do to change a culture. There's no easy answer here, but I believe the very first step is leveling the playing field for all members.
What about you, Julie? Any addition from you, please?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Christine said in terms of collaboration between VAC and CAF. I would also say WAGE needs to be leading a lot of these conversations. We need an important GBA plus analysis. They are the folks who created that analysis. They need to be included in these conversations. And that lastly, this is truly an intersectional conversation. So as Christine has said, for adult men in this country, not children, but adult men, the highest rates of sexual assault are if they are incarcerated or if they join the military. So we need to look at this from an intersectional lens. And I would also say intersectional lens includes the fact that there's a significant amount of racism in the military. The Proud Boys were recently designated a terrorist organization. There were proud members of those groups who were also proud CAF members. So you can't talk about power unless you talk about all the ways in which power manifests itself in the military. And that includes racism and homophobia. And that a huge reason why men don't come forward, as Christine said, is shame that's directly tied to the homophobia within the CAF. And so you have to look at it intersectionally, and that means having all the players at the table. So VAC, CAF, and WAGE.
Very good. And now last question is for the Liberals. Is it Ms. Vandenbeld?
Yes, thank you very much. And I do want to say how much we appreciate our witnesses, Ms. Wood and Ms. Lalonde, for being very, very articulate today in expressing what is needed to be done. And that is incredibly valuable for the committee and for the government. I would just like to ask, when we talk about this term, sexual misconduct, it goes from everything from an off-color joke to an inappropriate relationship to outright rape. And all of those things create culture. To what extent is stopping it at the level of the joke or the remark or the things that are just sort of laughed off and overlooked? To what extent do we need to respond at every single level to creating that culture? If I could just have Ms. Lalonde, and then if Ms. Wood wants to respond to that just for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an expert on bystander intervention. So, and what I hear from bystanders all the time is I didn't say anything because it was just a comment. If he had touched her, I'd have said something, but it was just a comment. It was just a joke. Oh, you know how he is. He's old school. Da, da, da. And so I think it is vitally important that the very philosophy of the path, which is what we're currently calling this discussion, explain that sexual violence exists on a continuum. And that comments are directly related to abuses of power, are directly related to, gang sexual violence, which is happening. And so this idea that, we have to focus on the serious forms of violence. You cannot just focus on those without pulling back and doing that macro piece. And we need to equip bystanders to say, yeah, maybe your intervention for a comment doesn't look the same for, versus someone being cornered, but it's still an intervention that's necessary.
Ms. Wood? Final comment, Ms. Wood.
I mean, I would agree 100%. I think it starts very tiny as microaggressions, and each little instance chips away at a person's self-confidence and their sense of belonging. If I could take just one moment, I would like to address the issue of peer support, because it's so fundamental to our asks, and I'd just like to make sure it's on record that we need this space, this online platform needs to be online, because we are mostly women and we are at home and we have different commitments within our families. We often are unable to drive. So online platform is the safest, easiest way for the government to provide a minimum standard of care and access to everyone. However, that space needs to be kept as safe as the person who was raped yesterday needs it to be today. It has to be moderated by professionals, so not people who have been trained in peer support and are volunteering. We are asking for actual funding to guarantee that the site is moderated by professionals and that the conversations are kept as safe as the newest person joining needs to see them.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our witnesses for amazing testimony today. We're going to suspend now momentarily while we do the sound checks for our next panel. Us, Stephanie Raymond as our witness, and we look forward to your comments. You'll have 5 minutes for opening comments, and then we'll go into our questions. You may begin.
Bonjour, je m'appelle.
Hello, I am Stephanie Raymond. I was in the Canadian Armed Forces from 2001 to 2013. During my military career, I experienced more than one sexual misconduct and assault, including the last one, as you know, was in December of 2011. And then I reported this to the military police in January of 2012. And as you know, it took roughly 10 years of basically ping pong between courts of appeal and Supreme Court, reopening of the investigation, closing of the investigation, complaints to the military police, etc., until I could finally have the opportunity to have this heard in regular criminal court in January of 2020. And then there was an appeal in last March. My aggressor pleaded guilty. So now we know that this is not exactly the way it should be to have all this time taken.
J'ai utilisé moins de 5 minutes.
I used less than 5 minutes, sorry. No, that's fine.
We'll start then with our first round of questions. Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Raymond, for being here and sharing your experience. It is because of your courageous step that led to the creation of Operation Honor. But now, after several more high-profile reports, it has been reported by the acting chief of the defense staff that Operation Honor has been a failure and was shutting down and would take the good and build something new from it. Do you believe there's anything that was good about Operation Honor? And is there anything worth building from?
La difficulté pour moi de répondre.
It's hard for me to answer that question perfectly because I'm no longer in the forces and haven't been since 2013. I think there was some good in that Operation Honor. However, I think that probably not the right issue was being targeted, or the aim wasn't in the right direction. In other words, the source of the problem isn't being targeted, but rather they're targeting the symptoms.
Okay. Under the previous Conservative government, we acknowledged that our Canadian Armed Forces has a cultural issue towards women in the military and had former Supreme Court Justice Deschamps do an external review with her report being released in 2015, which places a heavy emphasis on the need for an external independent body to oversee and investigate allegations of sexual misconduct. Given the recent revelations that include the chief of the defense staff, his placement, and the head of HR being under investigation for sexual misconduct, what are your thoughts on the creation of this independent body?
La création d'un organisme indépendant.
The creation of an independent body will be critical because throughout all of the proceedings that I was involved in when I was in the forces following the assault, I found that there was influence from the chain of command. There was a lack of confidentiality, and there were reprisals against the victim as soon as the victim reported any member of the military who was either high ranked or liked. As soon as the person is higher in rank, they'll be more protected than a simple soldier or new recruit. Obviously, you can't compare the two. And also, I think you have to divide the problem into the culture problem versus the criminal offense problem, because sexual assault is an indictable offense. And we have to separate that out from the issue of misconduct, which mixes all kinds of different things in that definition. The problem is a criminal problem and is not being appropriately dealt with. It's not being dealt with as a criminal act. It's not being judged on the same laws that the rest of Canadians are subject to, whether they're victims or accused. They don't have the same rights as in the regular criminal system.
Given the more recent information that has come to light, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and the former clerk of the Privy Council were all aware of the allegations against the former CDS Vance since 2018. Should such an independent body be under a ministry and the Government of Canada, or should it be an office answerable to Parliament? Your thoughts on that, please.
C'est une bonne question.
That's a good question. I wouldn't know what to say to that other than to say that a military organization or anything compensated or headed up by the Canadian Forces is not what should be intervening and supervising. Any misconduct or assault should be dealt with by some organization in which the army and the high-ranking officers have no influence, and where they cannot influence the judgment or the course of proceedings.
We had the Minister of Defense appear before this committee, and my colleague MP Shin asked him for some clarity on who was ultimately responsible for the handling of the sexual misconduct investigation into CDS Vance. The minister talked a lot about the process, to which my colleague MP Shin said, my concern is that we're trying to bring about a cultural shift. You keep bringing that up. You also bring up a lot about process, how you depend on a process. You don't want to bring clarity to that responsibility. You're just talking about process. A shift in culture comes when we transcend the process, when we recognize the responsibility. It was 3 years before General Vance was suspended. To me, that speaks volumes about abdication of responsibility. The former and current end quote. The former and current ombudsman have also said that going to the minister with the information was the correct path, and it was Minister Sargent's responsibility to look into the matter. Do you believe that in order to start addressing the culture in military, everyone has to take the responsibility seriously, including the minister?
I'm sorry, that's your time. We're going to Monsieur Serret for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair.
Finny, for your continuous courage to shine a light on the sexual misconduct of the Canadian Armed Forces. I hope that you are aware that your story is creating a ripple effect throughout many other individuals. Really feel heard, and since your story, obviously, in 2011, unfortunately, a lot of the burden in advocating and making the systematic changes in the Canadian Armed Forces has fallen on women, marginalized people, and survivors of sexual assault. So I want to get your opinion. How can allies within the Canadian Forces and allies outside of the Canadian Forces advocate for more of a multicultural change here?
Eh bien, je crois que...
Well, I think that everyone has to feel that they are affected and involved. Every time you talk about assault or misconduct in the forces, people tend to think that it's just something that's a matter of women or the victims, that only they are the ones who are affected. Men often don't feel that they're in any way impacted by this issue. They think it's a woman's issue. Unfortunately, things don't change because it seems like the public also doesn't get involved enough. The army is far removed from the public, and so it doesn't really seem to concern them. So we do have a major issue where few people actually want to get their feet wet. People aren't taking their responsibilities. And it's difficult to resolve a problem or an indictable offense when the people who are committing these acts suffer no consequences, if there's impunity or protection. It discourages people from doing if there's no consequences. I think that's really where it starts. Thank you. We heard from Julie Lalonde and Christine Wood about their ideas, and you've also mentioned a bit of this at the beginning. I'd like to hear more from you. How important is it to have a group that is independent with professional counselors or trauma advisors or counselors who would be accessible to victims throughout the entire complaints process? If you could talk about this. Yes, it would be important to have an organization which is independent, or a team that's independent of the Canadian Forces, to direct, support, or assist and answer questions that the victims may have. Also to have support, acceptable support that would be acceptable to Francophones, because what I noticed is that as a Francophone, it was very difficult to have any resources. And this is an issue that has been in existence in the Canadian Forces, regardless what the healthcare system is. There's no exception for this. So I am more talking about the criminal side of these acts. They are offenses and they should be judged outside the armed forces. And I am against having court-martials be looking into sexual assault. That's really my battle horse. I think that this has no business in a court-martial. In terms of support and in terms of your language, the French language, do you believe that there's a major shortcoming? And where is this area? Is it in services to victims? Is it in general services? Could you say a little bit more about the issue of victim support availability in French? Well, I'll try to be careful about what I'm saying at the same time, because personally in my career, I experienced discrimination because I was a francophone, especially when I would work with the regular force in Valcartier, which is a majority French city. In terms of medical services, and if I called the ombudsman or at other stages, I had to always call back later, or someone else had to call me back to be francophone. There was never anybody available. So I basically had to just muddle through it in English because there was only one person, let's say only one francophone, to respond to the entire Canadian forces during a given shift. Thank you. Now you have about 30 seconds to answer the last question. What do you think would be important changes to make to encourage more survivors to share their experience and report? For the moment, victims aren't speaking up because of reprisals and the effects on their careers. There are statistics now about the accused and their release, but we're not really looking enough at what happens to victims once they report this. What proportion of women are released, are kicked out and have to leave? So people know that if they speak up, their career is over. Thank you very much. Thank you. Madame Larouche, you have 10 minutes, 6 minutes.
We can't hear you. No, still nothing.
Can we please suspend?
Yes, let's suspend while we fix this technical issue.
Yes, you can start again. You haven't lost any of your time. Okay, sorry. Madame Raymond, as I've said, thank you very much for your testimony, which has made it possible for people in Quebec to become aware of assault issues. People have talked about it after you, and there was the Deschamps report. So really, this received media coverage in Quebec in terms of your journalistic work and Noémie Mercier and Alec Castonguay's article in Actuality in 2014, which led to the Deschamps report. So what you've said really has shed light on the situation. But you also talked about the time lags. And, you know, you started this over 10 years ago. You've said that the legal proceedings take far too long. In a few moments before I continue with my questions, what else would you like to say about the time that it took for this process? Well, in my case, they said that it took so long because the armed forces did not want to lay criminal charges. So the military police and the military prosecutor said that it wasn't sexual assault, it was just transactions, which they said they stopped as soon as I said no. Then after a complaint to the military police, The investigation was reopened. Same conclusion. There was no criminal action. There was no assault. So we closed this. Then there was the Actualité article. Then there were charges and acquittal, which was easy to forecast because the jury was made up of 5 military men. So these were time lags, not because nothing was happening. There wasn't immobility, but it was rather the legal issues and the administrative delays and all of the cogs that were being thrown in the wheels to interrupt the process. And all of that is what took 10 years nearly. Yes, because you said that there were 2 people involved in the Canadian Forces, and you talked about this took place in military facilities, and then you said there was a committee of 5 military men who declared Mr. Gagnon not guilty of sexual assault, so that men judging men in a case of sexual assault is kind of like, investigation by your own peers, that there could be a biased result. As you said, now that the Court of Appeal, the court-martial that had annulled the acquittal and ordered a new trial, and then this was validated by the Supreme Court and it was turned over to civil court. Could you talk about the importance that your case was taken out of the military justice system so that ultimately it could lead to a different result? It was absolutely essential. The minute it was proposed to me, I was asked if I wanted this, and I don't think it was available right from the beginning. That choice wasn't available. So when I was asked in January 2020, I immediately said yes. And from that point onwards, the accused repleaded not guilty, but there were some more delays and then COVID. And so over a year later, when the deadline was coming up, the gentleman decided to plead guilty. I think if this had been in a court-martial, I think it would have gone differently. No, I'm not in their heads, but I see that it was clear we were no longer playing the same game and the same rules and laws no longer applied. And he knew it. He knew that he was less likely to get off. Otherwise, he would have pleaded not guilty again. So again, the fact that it was taken out of the system, that there's an independent organization or agency that could judge cases of sexual misconduct is very important. You said that as soon as you complained in 2012 and that your life was made much more difficult by your higher-ups until you were released in 2013. Can you tell me more about the consequences when you make such a claim in the armed forces, in the Canadian Armed Forces? What kind of consequences are there? You experienced this. Yes, all kinds of consequences. Harassment, psychological harassment, bullying, actions on our pay. There were consequences on my actual pay. Staff went and played into the amounts, my benefits for travel to put me into the $5,000 amount. My annual leaves would not be approved, whereas the whole rest of the regiment got them approved. I mean, the list goes on and on. I wasn't allowed to train during my work hours where the other colleagues could work out. I wasn't allowed to wear civilian clothes on Fridays when I was campaigning for United Way because they said, oh, you could be provoking assault, whereas everybody else was allowed to. So there were all kinds of things. I was given written warning. I was placed under surveillance. There were all kinds of measures. I've actually forgotten them over time, but many that had a deleterious effect on my psychological health. And there were people who made nasty comments and unhealthy interventions from military doctors as well. So it was harder to report sexual abuse in the military world than it is in civil society. Is this what I'm concluding from your testimony? It's already not easy in civil society. Yes, because in the military, the members feel that they are being attacked and it's their whole profession that's being attacked, so they attack the person who's speaking up. Excellent. Thank you.
Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. I kind of want to actually build off of what Madame Larouche was doing as well. You specifically said that within your case, people who tried to report, and you had several instances, unfortunately, but during that time, there was a direct interference by the chain of command. Can you give those? Can you talk about those examples that you saw directly?
Eh bien, je n'étais pas comme.
Well, I wasn't aware of where my assault complaint was moving up in terms of the military police, but I would hear people meeting in the corridors between this would be my superior and his superior, and they were talking about my complaint, and they were talking about details about what had happened, and they were saying it wouldn't go very far. So I saw that my chain of command was aware of this. I was met with by a captain from my unit to tell me that what had happened had been discussed because police had called them to tell them. I'm trying to make a long story short here. Everybody was aware of it. I even got a harassment call from a military police officer who I didn't even know, who told me that the complaint was not going to be reopened because he had just learned that I had complained to the provost marshal regarding the military police. And they would talk to each other. In other words, the harassment investigators and the policemen. Everything was being talked about because I was trying to knock on every door there was, even in terms of the sexual assault team. And all of them were talking to each other amongst themselves. And they had all been told to stop talking to me and to stop giving me any information. It's a little hard for me to sum it all up because there was so much.
Yeah. You also said, I appreciate you trying to do that, but you also said that the higher someone ranked, the more popular they were, the more protected they were. Do you think that that's ultimately what happened with General Vance and in terms of that internal ability to protect their own and to close ranks in a lot of the same way that they shut you out, they did the same to protect him?
Oui, comme bien d'autres, le général Vance a dû être.
Yes, as was the case with many others, General Vance must have been protected because, you know, he was at the apogee of his career. He was perceived as being a rising star and a good pawn for the Canadian Forces. So there was no interest in having him be under investigation or moving him aside. No interest in investigating him for sexual misconduct. You don't want to tarnish a career. You don't want to lose a work colleague who is useful and who's our right-hand person. So obviously, there's an interest there among his peers or his superiors to hide these things because they liked the work that General Vance was doing professionally or, in other words, operationally, let's call it that.
Was in positions of power above him at the time who continued to ensure that his advancement, it did just that, it continued. That protection is at the very top for the entire time.
Oui. Et ne serait-ce que.
Yes, but, you know, his peers also had no interest in denouncing him or reporting him if they see any inappropriate actions because they know that they will not be protected when it'll be their turn to be protected for something, for any incorrect action that they will undertake. So the culture is very much, you know, help the other guy so they help you when you need it. Yes, it's all that.
Yeah. And Ms. Wood, in the previous hour here today, she spoke about the trauma, the impact of her her experiences, her rape, her those traumas, but what it did physically for her as well, right? The fibromyalgia, the constant headaches, a lot of those other physical side effects, I guess, if you want to call them that, implications, and that there were no services to really truly help her with the sexual trauma, the experience she had, but in addition to help her with all of those other effects that it had. Did you find that? Was that your experience as well?
Oui.
Yes, it was similar for me, the same thing. I even had a doctor who, well, he said to me, as long as I hadn't yet bought a tube to put on my car or a cord to strangle myself with, it was okay. Another doctor refused to treat me because he said it was known that I had reported what happened in the media. There was a psychiatrist. I had to be analyzed by a military psychiatrist. And he told me that I was responsible for everything, that I could have made things stop, that it was my responsibility to stop the facts, but I didn't. So I really didn't feel safe, even medically, in the armed forces. And this was really the turning point for me. That's where I realized I've got to get out of the armed forces.
For 5 minutes in the second round.
There, can you hear me? Okay. Votre histoire est vraiment...
Your story is unbelievable. Something that took over 10 years. I thank you so much for your courage and your tenacity because, oh my goodness, so hard. The process began when you made your complaint to the military police. Could you briefly explain the process to us and why, at the end, you feel that the issue being resolved, was it fair or not, and why you decided to begin the civil process because you felt that the military was not leading to a proper result? I had no confidence in the independence of the military court. I did not trust the military judge. I did not trust that so-called jury, which was a committee of military members selected by the armed forces. I was also familiar. I had read the Marshall Act and how offenses were interpreted based on their own legislation, which is not as evolved as our criminal laws are. So I knew that my assault was going to be judged as though we were still in the 1940s. So I knew that the risk of acquittal was extremely high, but I still wanted to see the process through to show the public that it just doesn't work. And I think that it did work to a certain extent, because when it got into the civil sphere, all of a sudden he pleaded guilty. So he admitted that he'd done it, whereas he had been acquitted before. So there's some absurd aspects here. Yes, of course. Knowing what you know now, if you were able to start it all over again, would you? Yes, I would. I wouldn't go through all of this a second time. I would not even go through, I think, a second process for a second assault. You know, once in a lifetime is enough. But now I don't regret it because it did lead to something. But during the first acquittal, I wondered why I had bothered to do so much that took so much for so little. So, you know, it's easy to say now. Well, I'd like to thank you because your process and your story and your history is so helpful to us. And the idea of changing a process and demonstrating to the world how important it is, and we can't do it if we don't have the examples. Are there things you would do differently? counsel, advice. Would you advise others to do something differently? Well, I wasn't perfect, of course. There's nothing that comes to mind right now that I wouldn't do again, because it seems like all the things that I did do had meaning or were ultimately useful later on. I was fortunate to have the assistance of Councillor Drapeau, who advised me, and I was able to make the right decisions thanks to the assistance of other people. So I wouldn't change that because I couldn't. I couldn't get it out to civilian police initially. I tried, but it wasn't possible. Sorry, I didn't mean any criticism. It was just for our own information. Okay, and how are you doing now? Now I'm doing very well. I'm very pleased with the way things went and the help that this may bring, and that it was not for nothing. And in your opinion, have you received the true support and compensation and the benefits necessary? I mean, it's impossible to evaluate this, but do you feel that there's been a balance? Well, in my situation, I consider myself to be very fortunate because my file was accepted at Veterans Affairs Canada for labor conflict issues because it wasn't acceptable for assault because there had been an acquittal. And then there was an out-of-court settlement with the government. So I am serene with what has happened, and I can continue on with my life.
To Ms. Zahid for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I want to thank Ms. Raymond for her courage and all along and shining light on sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. So thank you for that. Ms. Raymond, given the presence of the chain of command, the military environment has another layer of complexity when subordinates report sexual violence. So can you please talk about how power imbalances make it difficult for the survivors to report sexual misconduct?
La difficulté qu'il y a, c'est que c'est un...
The difficulty is it's as though it's a whole separate civilization. It's like a family. We're told, they tell us where to train, how to train. We can't go to a regular doctor. The Army decides which doctor we see. We have to respect anybody of higher rank at all times, even if we, run into them outside the workplace. So the people who don't live in the armed forces don't understand the extent to which there's a hierarchy. Everything goes by rank. Everything is supervised. Everything you do is decided upon and has to be approved. You can't just do what you want. You can't decide to go where you want to make a report or to request assistance. We're in that milieu and we can't leave that milieu.
J'espère que je réponds.
I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. I know that the fear of repercussions at work are some of the barriers that individuals experience when they are trying to make up their mind whether to report sexual misconduct. So what are some of the challenges with regards to confidentiality throughout the reporting process, and how would you recommend that we improve that process?
Well, the fact that an indictable offense is managed by police outside the Army would make it more possible to have confidentiality or more confidentiality, because when you make a complaint in the military, everybody knows about it. It goes up the chain of command, and the commander it goes up to the top and comes back down, and all your colleagues at work become aware of this. So everybody judges you, people point their fingers at you, you receive all kinds of unpleasant comments, And often your assaulter has a higher rank than you, so you don't have much power, you don't have much importance in terms of the regiment and it's in the Army's eyes. So it's easier to sacrifice you. They want to keep the person who has more experience, the one who actually carried out this act, this reprehensible act. So the fact that it's something outside would protect the victims. That's essential, really.
Can we ensure that there is confidentiality throughout the reporting process? So any suggestions you have, which you can give it to us, which can help us in making sure that there is confidentiality throughout the reporting process?
Well, if we still have members of the military judging other members of the military or investigating their peers or other members of the military, I do not believe, I'm not hopeful that there would be confidentiality. And that's not something that's limited to the military police. I've experienced this in the medical milieu as well. Confidentiality is often not respected. It's often breached. So I have no recommendations other than there should be an external agency that analyzes everything. They shouldn't be members of the military. I don't see why there should be breaches of confidentiality. But if we remain within the military, emails, phone calls, everything is done to inform. You know, the news spreads and rumors spread because you're in the military world.
Before we end, are there any gaps which currently exist throughout your process based on your experience? And what do you think could be done better to close those gaps?
I'm sorry, that's your time. Nous allons maintenant Madame Larouche.
Now over to Madame Larouche for 2.5 minutes. Again, thank you for everything you have done to shed light on this issue today. And I would also like to congratulate you for your tenacity. And you've shown this over the last 10 years. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Not only did you have difficulties when you were reporting the assaults on you, but you were saying that you were in Valcartier. And as a francophone in the Canadian Armed Forces, you had trouble accessing services. You felt that there was discrimination on the basis of language. Yes. Even francophones speak English. I don't know why, actually. The forms in English are used even by francophones because most Canadians are Anglophone. So they're posted. I'm using the English term, sorry. They're posted. They have regular postings and they go to English-speaking bases, whereas it's more likely to be more well-rounded if you use the English terms and you get used to working in English. So even if you're on a French base, you'll continue. They continue to use those terms. So for somebody who is only francophone, you have to relearn a whole other vocabulary. Now, when you talk about helplines that you make a phone call to, and you get somebody who's in Ottawa or at headquarters. That's where there are not a lot of francophones, and the anglophones are not bilingual. So another problem to add, you've also said that you were a victim of several assaults. So you experienced more than one assault. Do you find that the government was brave enough to go right to the end in terms of investigating allegations of assault in the Canadian military? And if you were assaulted abroad, is it possible that there are victims abroad? Would that culture also occur in missions abroad? Yes. Unfortunately, we don't know. For things that I do know that I wouldn't disclose, there are a lot of things that the public does not know. Things that are much more horrible than what I experienced. Because when you're abroad, you're even more protected. If you're on the ground with children in Afghanistan or in Bosnia, there's nobody to watch you or report you. I do not trust. Well, the government hasn't demonstrated that it truly wants to change and resolve this issue, because if it really did, it would pull criminal cases out of the military justice system. To me, it's an aberration to still deal with them in the force. So you're saying it's becoming a national security issue?
A round of questions with Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually wouldn't. I would like to have you continue, Ms. Raymond, on that to talk about those international supports. In terms of if you have suggestions that we can pass on to the government on how you start to create the provision of those supports. I mean, certainly, of course, domestically, but then additionally the international side as well.
C'est difficile un peu pour moi parce que j'ai.
Well, it's a bit difficult for me because I wasn't on the ground in operations. I know that it is difficult to report in the forces, even from Canada. So if you're abroad, it's even more difficult. There is another layer because the army can resolve its issues itself without informing civilian institutions. It is the watertightness, the seal of information. So that means that family secrets stay in the family. There's no external eye to supervise. So nobody reports, nobody speaks up, because they know that there will be major consequences if they do. Unfortunately, I can't tell you more.
I just wanted to quickly ask, so in the previous session, we also talked about the extension of supports to Veterans Affairs Canada, and you had said that luckily your case had been taken, you're now receiving compensation, but in terms of the supports for victims of sexual misconduct and abuse, assault, what do you see there as being provided, or the gaps that need to be filled?
Moi, je n'ai pas connu d'aide spécifiquement.
I was not familiar of any sexual trauma assistance specifically. My file was approved through something that had nothing to do with the assault because we knew that would have been rejected. And then I received assistance from a psychologist. Other than that, the assistance was supposed to be given to me by a military psychiatrist, the one who told me that I was the one who decided to pursue it. So I was asked to be seen. I asked to be seen by an external psychologist and was treated by a civilian. So it was my good fortune, but it wasn't easy. It's difficult to get help. People say the help is there, but you really have to try because even, with Veterans Affairs, I had to appeal the decision because I was told that there were no sequela, there were no consequences, and that I needed no psychological assistance. Whereas, I was there at Veterans Affairs. This is all the time that we have, so I would like to thank our witness for your service and your excellent commentary today. Thanks to all of you.
Now we're going to go in camera for our committee business, so we'll suspend while we meet you on the other side.
Merci beaucoup.